I'm Kushi, and I'm giving the Intro to Python workshop. Let's go over today's agenda. And please feel free to ask me any questions or put comments in the chat box, or as I go through each slide. If you guys have any questions or anything you'd like to share, please let me know. You can always unmute yourself and ask or say whatever you need to at any point. So I'll start by introducing IDEs, which stands for Integrated Development Environments. And then from there, we'll go over variables and comments, which are basic Python concepts, or not just Python, they're any programming concepts. And then from there, we'll jump into data types, which include ints, floats, bools, tuples, arrays, strings. And I'll go into more detail about about the purpose of each of them later. And then at the very end, we'll have overall questions, and you guys can give me feedback on what you guys think you'd like to learn better, or what you're more interested in learning about next time. So what is an IDE and how to start coding? So has anyone heard of Visual Studio, Sublime, Eclipse, or IDLE? So these four are basic platforms, or very common platforms that programmers like to use for writing their code on. And basically an IDE is software that's created to compile or any language code and to debug the code, or to run the code and perform outcomes. So let's watch a quick video on IDEs.
Tool belt for software development.
What does this stand for? IDE is basically Integrated Development Environment. And this video is going to go into more detail. Can you guys hear the video?
Developers.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, awesome.
Software creation can be a complicated thing, even for professionals, often involving numerous tools for code creation, building, and testing. An integrated development environment, or IDE, is like software development tool belt, consolidating many of these functions together in a single framework, application, or service. An IDE simplifies software development by enabling the deployment and management of multiple tools at once. Things like text editors, code libraries, compilers, and test platforms, improving overall developer productivity. Through one graphical user interface, an IDE enables source code writing and editing, translation into a readable language for the computer, and software testing to solve issues or bugs. IDEs eliminate time spent choosing, configuring, and even learning various tools. An IDE can also include programmable editors, object and data modeling, unit testing, and they can even build automation tools. Developers choose an IDE based on the type of application they want to produce and what tools they prioritize. IDEs can be open source or commercial, a standalone application or part of a package, range from web-based to cloud-based to mobile, and be language-specific or multi-language.
That's a quick introduction to IDEs. One IDE that we're going to be using right now is called Python Tutor, and Python Tutor is an online IDE, so you don't have to download it. It's just a website that you guys can open up on the internet and start coding directly in Python. And the cool thing about Python Tutor is that you can visualize the code as you write it. And there is a question, what did people use in the past before IDEs? So people used to write directly into the terminal. Mac has terminals. There are languages called Unix and Linux. So Unix and Linux are the very basic languages that code started being developed in, which is command line languages. So you guys can open up the terminal on your laptop. And after you open up the terminal, here, can you guys see the terminal?
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys can see it has my name and then the $sign. From there, you can use commands such as cd or ls if you do CD, you could do something like CD desktop, and then that will go into my desktop. If you do ls, that'll list all of the everything that's available on my desktop. So Unix and Linux are really basic programming languages through which IDEs are developing, so that, oh, I just saw that you can only see Python tutor, but not the terminal. Here, let me try to figure that out. But basically, if you guys open up the terminal on your laptop and then type in something like CD desktop, your laptop will be configured so that it has opened up the folder to your desktop. And then from there, if you do ls, it'll list every single file or document or folder that's in your desktop. And then from there, you can navigate between files and folders. You can open it you can find it down here if you have a Mac, or do command and then spacebar to find the terminal. And open up your Finder on your laptop, and after opening up the Finder, you guys can look for the terminal and it should be there. All right, so instead of using the terminal today, we'll be using Python Tutor, which is the most accessible since we're doing most of the code online, and then we could see how Python is organizing the code behind the scenes. And then the question, what were you saying to type in? You can type in terminal or shell, and it should pop up. Okay, so let's start with variables. Have you guys been introduced to the concept of variables before? You guys can put it in the chat box. All right, no worries. You can define variables to be able to access code or a data type. So for example, I can create a variable called name and set it equal to cushy. So now I have this title name, which represents a string, which is my name. So if I have name equals to cushy, that means that this variable now contains this string, or I could set it to a number, like num equals to 10. And now if I print num, 10, which is the data that num is storing, will be printed. If I print name, cushy will be printed. Let's try to see that. So what Python does first is that it creates a global variable and stores name there, which represents the value cushy. And then after that, it goes to num equals to 10. It creates a new variable num and stores the value 10 there. And then if I do print num, it prints 10. If I do print name, it prints my name. This Python requires semicolons? No. Luckily, Python does not require semicolons. However, if you write a function or a statement such as if num equals to 10, print true. So while Python does not require semicolons, indentation and colons are important. If you have a conditional or you're creating a function, you always need a semicolon a colon to say this is a conditional, or if it's a function, if I do def my function, I will need a semicolon here before I have the statement inside of the function. So Python doesn't require semicolons, but colons and indentation is extremely important. If I had this print outside of the if statement, then it won't print based on this condition. However, it'll print nonetheless. But today we're not going to touch on conditional statements or functions. Instead, we're going to focus on data types. So it would be really great if you guys could all have Python Tutor open. You guys should go to pythontutor.com, and then from there you can press visualize execution, and all the code that we write today on Python Tutor should come up there, or the output should display there. Let me know if you guys have any questions about setting up Python Tutor. If not, let's go straight into object types. So there are different data types that represent different types of values. For example, if it's a text, you would use string or character. Numeric types are included with ints and floats and complexes, but today we're going to focus more on ints and floats. And then sequence types to represent a variety of data instead of just a variable representing one value. We can use a sequence type, such as a list or tuple, to have multiple values stored in there. A mapping type, we use a dictionary. And what a dictionary does is that you can have a dictionary that says that my name is Cushy, and then have another value in the dictionary saying my favorite movie is, what is my favorite movie? Jumanji, for example. And in the dictionary, you could store keys and values. So the keys in this example would be my name and my favorite movie, and the values would be Cushy and Jumanji. So a dictionary is a little different from a sequence type, such that it maps a key to a value such that it represents a dictionary, sort of. Like in a dictionary, you have a word and its definition. It's a very similar concept such that it has a key and a value. But we're not going to go much into dictionaries today. Instead, we'll focus more on the other types that are included in Python. And then there are set types, which is basically unordered, and it can only contain one of each element. So there are no duplicates, which makes it different from a sequence type, which can have duplicates. And also the fact that it's unordered changes it such that it doesn't, it's not the same as a sequence type, because in the sequence type, order matters a lot more. And then finally, a Boolean, which is what I used in my if statement as I was writing on Python Tutor. I had if num equals 10, then print true. The print true part was a Boolean, basically said print that this is true. And the condition was if num equals to 10. That also represents a Boolean because it checks for a true or false. It checks if num, which is my variable representing 10, actually equal the value of 10. So that's a Boolean that if the condition is met, then it prints another Boolean, which is true. All right, and a way, data types are extremely important because basically all of Python is working with data types. It's changing data or manipulating data or accessing data or deleting data. And since basically most code is based on performing actions with data, it's really important to know the types of the data that you're working with. And there is a type function which basically says that if you have a variable representing a certain value, you can check the type of that variable by doing type and then the variable in there. So for example, if we go to Python Tutor, if we do print type of num, we can see that the output is class int. And that means that the type of num is in a class called int. A class is a little different from a function such that it represents a data collection. So this type, num, which is 10, is in the collection of integers. Does that make sense? Okay, I see a question. Why did I put 2 equal signs there? Oh, in the if statement. Okay, I see. So if I have the statement if num equals 10, print true. I have 2 equals here because I want to say if this condition is true. So when I have a condition, I want 2 equal signs to basically represent that this statement is not setting the variable num to 10, but it's instead asking, is it true that num equals to 10? So I have 1 equal here saying that I want the, oh, I see that someone has to leave. It was really great having you. I hope you enjoy what you were there for so far. But going back to this concept, I have num equals to 10, basically saying that my variable is set to the value of 10. And then in this if statement, I have double equals saying, is it true that my variable is equal to the value 10 instead of setting it to 10. And then I have 2 practice problems that I want you guys to do on Python Tutor. The first one is create a variable 5 and then print type of x. And then I'll have you guys put your answers in the chat box. And then the second one is to create a string for your name in 2 ways using data types. So to go into more detail about how to create a variable a variable representing a value in 2 ways. One of them is to say, for example, x equals to hello world. So here you are implicitly saying that x equals a string. Another way to do the same thing is to do x equals to str and then the value of your variable. So you can have the string hello world typecasted by putting str in the front. And that's saying that, that's basically explicitly confirming that the value is a string. So another example is this dictionary. You have your key and your value, and the keys in this case would be name and age, and the values are John and 36. We can specify to Python that no matter what, there is no confusion. We can ensure that this is a dictionary by saying dict and then putting the values in there. And a cool exercise for you guys to do would be to try to create variables in 2 different ways and set it equal to a string using both typecasting and implicitly setting the variable to a value. And then for the first variable you create, I want you guys to set the variable to name and then the second variable to my name. I'll give you guys a few minutes. Let me know when you guys are done and put it in the group chat so that we could go over it after. Typecasting is basically saying that I'm explicitly defining my value to be a string instead of implicitly giving it a string value. Let me show you guys on Python Tutor. So I have num equals to 10. Another way that I could set num to 10 using typecasting would be to do num equals to int 10. So we're specifying that we want this value, no matter what, to be an integer. And this is useful because otherwise you could also do num equals to string 10 or num equals to bool 10. And let's print out num after each of these instances. So we have a print num after we set it to an integer, after we typecast it to a string, and after we typecast it to a Boolean. So at the end of this, we have 10 as an int. we have 10 as a string, and we have it as a Boolean. And I'll explain to you why Boolean of 10 equals to true in this case. But after we typecast it and we print it, we can also double check the type of our value now by doing type num after each case. And it'll give us different results. So first we have it as an int, and then a string, and then a Boolean, just as we specified. Does that make sense? Why typecasting is important. So let's try to do the two exercises here. And please let me know if you have any questions, or if you tried both of them and you're ready to move on to the next concept. So in the second practice problem, I'm thinking that you guys would have two variables created, and the first one, the variable's name is name, and then the second variable you would call my name, and the first variable would be set to a string of your name without typecasting, and then the second variable, my name, you would typecast it such that it's a string representing your name. What do you guys get when you do print type of x? What is the value that the output shows? Yeah, the thumbs up is a great idea. If everyone's good with the time, as you guys get your answers in, please put it in the group chat so I can see if you guys are on the right track. Second part, yeah, that sounds right. Everyone else got class int for the first question, which is print type of x. And since x represents an integer, the type would be of class int. But the second part, that's correct. It should be a string. Are you guys ready to move on to the next slide? So the first data type we're going to focus on is ints and floats. So an integer is a whole number. It could be either positive or negative of an unlimited length. Like it could be 1,852, for example. That would still be an integer because it's a whole number, and it's on the positive side of the spectrum, or it could be negative 1,187. Doesn't matter how big the integer is, but it will still count as an int if it is a full numeric number. And then a float is similar. A float is comparable to a decimal number. For example, 1.89420. That could be a float, or even 0.00 is a float. And then going into type conversion, we can have a float a. So let's have a equals to 1, b equals to 365, c is 0. So if we have float a becomes 1.00 because it's converted to a new value type, a float. And so very similar to typecasting, after typecasting, the value changes such that it is the new value type that we define it to be. And say we have the float y equals to 3.65. If we do int y, then we get 1 because, sorry, we don't get 1. We get, so that's actually a very interesting concept. So say we have y here equal to 3.65. After typecasting it, so first let's print y for what it is as a float, and then let's do print int of y. What do you guys expect will happen if we do this? Feel free to unmute yourselves or put in the chat box. All right, a few different guesses. Let us visualize this. So everything after the decimal gets removed, it's always rounded downwards to the full number before the decimal. So in this case, the new int is not 1. What would it be instead? So to practice this concept, Let's do these two practice questions. Let's create a float of value 3.99, and you can name the variable anything that shows that this variable represents a numeric value. The thing about variables is that you want to try to make it as close to the value to the purpose of the variable that you're creating. For example, how I made you guys have the variable name to represent your name. You would want the variable to be something that's representative of the value that is associated with it. So for example, this one could be my float or my value, but you don't want to do float or value because those are two keywords that Python will recognize not as values, not as variables, but instead as data types. So instead we want to name the variable something else that can represent a floating point value. And then let's convert this float to an integer and then print the result. And I want to see what you guys get when you do this. That's the first question. And then the second question is to create an integer of 4 and directly print the float of this value. How can we make the float into an integer without the print data type? So this print data type, print is actually not a data type. Print instead, so print is not a data type. We can have another variable such as my int that we do int of y. So print just basically says that we want to output this value from our source code. So if we do this, it'll print y, but it won't print my int unless we specify that we want to print my int. And then after this new variable, the value is printed. Yeah, and then afterwards, you have x equals to 3.99, which is a float value data type, and then you would convert the float to an int before you print it by typecasting it like that. So the order is a little different. So you don't need the new float equals to float x. I could write it out after everyone has their value submitted or after everyone has their code in the chat. But you have your idea is close. So for B, you're setting the variable print to be the float of B instead of commanding the IDE to print the float. It's very similar to how you did it in the first part. You did print int A. You would do something similar. You would do print float B. You would print float of B. In the first one, you set the variable A to the integer of A, and then you printed it. It's really, really close to the second one where you're setting the variable B to be 4, and then you want to directly print that float of B instead of setting it equal to the value float B. Yeah, so the code would technically work. Adeline is just in the second part, try to print the float of the value without setting a variable to represent the float of the value. So you can remove one of those lines so that you have 2 lines instead of 3 for the second question. And then, so yeah, that's really, really close. In your first attempt, you had print equals to float of B. Try to keep that in mind, this part where you have float of B as you print it, except the only difference is that we don't want to set it equal. We just want to do print, and inside of the print, we'd have float B. So if I have these 2 questions in my Python tutor, let me try to show you what I'm thinking they would be like. So a way to do a multi-line comment is to have 3 single quotes before and 3 single quotes after, saying that this information is not code, but you'd like to have this information in the IDE to refer to. Another way to do a comment is to do a hashtag and then write whatever you need to after that. And it's basically just important information that you'd like to have to keep your code organized, but it's technically not code. It could just be English, like, it could be whole sentences. It could be anything that you need for referring to it. The double slashes work for Java, C++, C, a lot of different languages, but Python does it a little differently, such that you need to use a hashtag or the triple single quotes to say that you want to comment out this chunk of information. Yeah, I'll definitely share the slides. But to quickly do these 2 practice problems, for the first one, I could have my float, which equals to 3.99. And then I could do new int equals to float equals to int of my float, and print this new variable that I have that is the integer of my original value. And then for the second part, create an int of 4. So my int equals to 4, and then I want to directly print the float of this value, so I would do print float of my int. So I have it typecasted directly in the print statement. And then if I visualize this, I can see I have 3 and 4.0. Does anyone have any questions on this part? So I don't think we have the time to cover the rest of the material. I go more into detail about Booleans, tuples and arrays and strings. And then I have overall questions towards the end. But if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask me now, I'd be happy to answer the questions and share the slide with you. But if you would rather I use that time to go into brief detail about Booleans, tuples, and strings, I am happy to do that too. And then I have an ending slide where I want to say, please share any feedbacks with me that you feel comfortable sharing. So ints round down. Ints, if you convert a float into an integer, it does round down. Yes. Okay, would you guys like me to go super quickly over Booleans and tuples, arrays, strings? I'll spend like a minute on each one because I don't want to keep you over time. Okay, so a Boolean basically represents a true or false value. And you can use this function, bool, and inside the function have a value to evaluate if the result would be true or false. So any string would be considered true unless empty. Any number is true except for 0. And any other data type, such as a list, tuple, set, or dictionary, are always true unless the data type is empty. And then here are examples of false values that if you do bool of the variable, you'll end up getting the output of false. If you had directly the Boolean false or empty parentheses to represent a tuple, an array, a dictionary, a string, or an integer or float, then those will directly give you the value of false or the output of false. A single quote means not, and a double quote means I have this conditional. If it's equal, then give me a true or false. And then exclamation equal means if not true. So it's not like saying 1 equals to true. So if I am to say if 1 equals to true, I would do 1 equals to true like this. I have it written in the chat box, and that's saying that I'm not setting the value of a variable called one. Actually, one wouldn't even count as a variable. It has to be a series of characters. But one equals to true will give me an error. But if I have one equals to true, then I'm saying that if this condition is true, then give me, then perform the rest of the code inside this condition. All right, going to the next slide. This one is a little complicated. So I'll briefly mention what a tuple is and a list. So I have tuples and arrays. Arrays are basically lists in Python, but if you look at other coding languages, they're referred to as arrays themselves. A tuple is a collection which is ordered and unchangeable. So it's a sequence type, and the values inside of a tuple, you can't add values to the tuple, you can't remove them, or change what is already in the tuple. So for example, fruits equals to apples, bananas, and cherries. If you try to change cherries to be another value, then it will give you an error. But you can access what's already in the tuple by saying, I want the second index. I want to look at the second index and return the value that's in that index inside of my tuple. So sequence types always start at the index of 0. So apple would be 0, banana is 1, and cherry is 2, which is why if we do fruits of 2, then we get cherry. And a list is a similar concept. However, you can have duplicates, which sets don't allow you to have, because sets want it to be such that it only carries the elements or values that are in that data type, but it's unordered, so it shouldn't matter if it's a sequence or not. But say, for example, in our array or list, we have the elements apple, banana, cherry, and lemon. You can slice it from 0 to 2, which will give us apple and banana, because we're saying that we want to look from the 0th index to the second, but not including the second index. So that's just apple, banana, and then fruits to 3 would be everything up to the 3rd index. So that's apple, banana, and cherry. And you could also go backwards such that this is index -1, -2, -3, and -4. How can you tell the difference between tuple and array? So the syntax of writing a tuple and array is different. A tuple, you use a single parenthesis on each side. And basically, you can also tell the difference between a tuple and array is if you try to modify a tuple, it won't let you. But if you try to modify an array, you're able to add values, take out values, or change the values inside of the array. And an array has brackets around the values that it includes. And then strings are arrays of characters. So you can have the characters KHUSHI for my name. And if you put them together, then you get an array of characters. And a string is basically that array. When would you want to use a tuple versus an array? So you'd want to use a tuple when you're writing about data that you don't want anyone else to modify, or you don't believe you'll modify in the future. You want it to be set in place and unable to have it changed. And then an array is when you want it to be flexible, a flexible sequence of data. And strings are similar to arrays such that if you have a string, if I have hello world as my string, and I want to remove the word hello and just have world, I'm able to remove characters in my array of characters such that I can modify the string to be just world. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Does anyone have any overall questions for me? I'll put the link of the slides in in the group chat so that anyone can see it anytime. And if you give me an email, then I'd be happy to forward slides to you. Python was actually my first coding language. I love Python. What do you use Python for? So Python is very different from other languages, such that Python's really similar to English instead of C++, which has like a bunch of memory allocation and intricacies. But Python's very straightforward, and it allows the user to be able to, it's more about data analysis and keeping track of data than other languages, because other languages are more focused on manipulating data or trying to understand the data to its core. So Python's like a really great first language to learn because it's more easy to modify, if that makes sense. Is Python? No. Python is not commonly used in cybersecurity. You'd be using more C, C++, because those are, you have the option to do a lot more. Those are really powerful languages. And cybersecurity, you'd want to have a very hard guard around the code. But Python is really common in game development. Game development, design. A lot of companies use JavaScript and Python for collecting data and analyzing the data. But I would definitely recommend that if you're new to programming, that you would start with Python. There are a lot of really good Coursera courses, edX. I think most schools start with Java, but colleges usually tend to focus on Python before they do Java or JavaScript or anything else. There is a website called W3 Schools and Geeks for Geeks. Those are really great resources if you want to have a more in-depth understanding of something. And feel free to share your emails with me. I'll share out some other resources that I think are really good for learning Python. And I'll send you the links to the slides and Python Tutor, because Python Tutor is like the best tool ever. Any site where we can practice Python. I don't have anything on the top of my mind, but I'll look into it and I'll share it with you. And lastly, thank you so much for coming to my workshop. Feel free to stay on the call after, but if you guys are in a time crunch, you guys could drop anytime. And yeah, definitely share your emails if you want to stay in touch, or if I could send you any resources that will help with Python. And if you guys have a LinkedIn, you guys can always connect with me. Take a picture of the slide, anything you need to. Yeah, it was a pleasure being here today. I hope you guys learned something. Unfortunately, I did not record today's workshop, but I can do that at my own time and send it to you guys. Thank you. I love the template too.